This is part 2 of the Chapter 28 lecture notes. We covered the phylum Porifera, which includes the sponges. Now we're moving on to the phylum Ctenophora, which starts with a silent C. The phylum Ctenophora includes the comb jellies. Okay, so the phylum Ctenophora includes the comb jellies, which this is a separate phylum from the organisms that we call jellyfish, okay? They're very similar, but they're not in the same phylum. Comb jellies are solitary, free-swimming marine invertebrates, and that, of course, marine means that they are saltwater. They live in saltwater. They live in the ocean. They are small, they're transparent, and sometimes they can even be bioluminescent, meaning that they produce their own light. If you go and look at the comb jellies on display at the the aquarium in Atlantic Beach area, they have this whole tank that contains these bioluminescent comb jellies, and the room is dark, so you can see that they're all lit up. It's really pretty. Now, the jelly-like substance that you see in jellyfish is called mesoglea. Ctenophora comb jellies have mesoglea, but the difference is that their entire body is composed of this jelly-like substance, mesoglea, which is not true for jellyfish. They just have mesoglea in their bodies. Their whole body is not composed of it. So there is a slight difference, and the Ctenophora do not have stinging cells. That's a big difference there. The cnidarians also have only 2 tissue layers, and I'm not sure if I said that, that these Ctenophora have 2 tissue layers, so they are diploblastic. The cnidarians also are diploblastic, 2 tissue layers, but they're different from the Ctenophora because they have specialized stinging cells called cnidocytes. So cnidocytes are stinging cells, and then they have a fluid-filled capsule called a nematocyst, which is the barb. It contains the barb that actually does the stinging. So cnidocytes are the cells, and the nematocyst is the actual stinger. Then they have a 2-layered body sac, so they have 2 tissue layers. They have the outer layer, which is the epidermis, and it's composed of ectoderm, and the inner layer, which composes the gastrovascular cavity, and that is composed of endoderm. There's no mesoderm. There's no tissue called mesoderm. So there's ectoderm that forms into the epidermis, and there's endoderm that forms into the gastrovascular cavity. So gastro means stomach, or the digestive system is referring to the digestive system or the stomach, and vascular is referring to the circulatory system or blood vessels. So cnidarians don't have a true digestive system or a true circulatory system. They have this gastrovascular cavity that has the functions of both a circulatory system for transporting nutrients and waste, and a digestive system for breaking down the food that the cnidarian consumes. Now, the 2 body forms of cnidarians are the polyp, and you've seen that in one of the pictures that we saw, one of the slides we saw earlier. This is the polyp form here, the polyp form of a cnidarian. And the medusa body form is when you have the tentacles facing downward, and that's like a jellyfish. So this is a slide that's comparing a comb jelly and a jellyfish. This is a comb jelly in picture A, and the comb jelly, remember, is phylum Ctenophora. And then you have a jellyfish in picture B, which is from the phylum Cnidaria. Now, cnidarians have a large diversity. It's not just jellyfish. The sea anemones, if you remember, it's an old movie, but most people have seen it at some point, Finding Nemo. The sea anemone has a polyp body form. It is sessile as an adult. That means it just, remains attached to its substrate like a sponge, but it has tentacles that face upward, and it does have stinging cells. And if you remember in the movie Finding Nemo, that it's the clownfish are they are able to resist those nematocysts. They have this layer of slime on their bodies that protects them, so they're able to live within the sea anemone. The sea anemone acts as their shelter. So a sea anemone has the polyp body form. A coral, believe it or not, that has a little animal inside the coral. The corals have the polyp body form, but they produce a covering, or they're encased in a calcium carbonate. And that is what forms what we know as coral, that forms the coral reefs. And they can be different colors. In fact, we have a color called coral, which is similar to peach, but they're all different beautiful colors. And there's an animal that lives inside of them, but then when the animal dies, it leaves behind its shell of calcium carbonate, and that's what forms coral reefs. So here you can see a photograph of a sea anemone. You can see a photograph of a cup coral. This is what the coral actually, the animal looks like. A typical jellyfish called Aurelia, the genus Aurelia. And then we have a Portuguese man-of-war. And the other day, I went to see the Kitty Hawk. I went to see where the Wright brothers first flew their first airplane ever. They invented the first airplane. And so I went with my husband, and then we went on the beach at Nag's Head, and there were we counted 12, and we weren't even there very long. Portuguese man-of-wars that had washed up on the beach. They have kind of a bluish purple tint to them when you see them washed up on the beach. They kind of do here too. Here's some purple and here's some blue. But anyway, the man-of-war is like a colony, really, of organisms. So let's talk a little bit more about the Cnidaria, about the individual organisms in this phylum. The Hydra are freshwater cnidarians. All the other cnidarians that I've been talking about so far have been marine. They've been saltwater. But the Hydra is a freshwater cnidarian. It's very small. It has a polyp body form. It's only about 1/4 inch in length. So you can see them, but you still probably could see them better with a magnifying glass, but they're definitely not microscopic. You can see them with your naked eyes. So the Hydra are the freshwater cnidarians. They have a polyp body form. Then you have the true jellyfish that their primary body form is the Medusa body form. Here's the anatomy of a Hydra, and this is showing you, picture B is showing you a Hydra that has started to reproduce asexually by forming a bud, and that bud is going to break off. This is just called budding. It's a form of asexual reproduction. We also saw it in the yeast cells in the kingdom fungi. But that little bud is going to break off and attach to a substrate and grow into an adult Hydra. You can see the tentacles, the mouth, the gastrovascular cavity, and then blown up even more, you can see the cnidocytes containing the nematocysts. Now, we're going to talk about organisms called spiralians, and the spiralians consist of the Lophotrochozoans, which are divided into the Lophophores and the Protozoans. This is wrong. I'm sorry. This should be the Lophophores and the Trochophores. Let me see if I can write it. Sorry, it's TROCHOPHORES. look, just write this. There. Write trochozoans instead of protozoans. That was a mistake, and I don't want to take the time to correct it because I have a lot to do. So you have the lophophores and the trochozoans, and the lophophores are the bryozoans, brachiopods, and phoronids. And really, honestly, there's not a lot of these that are very common animals that you would recognize, but the ones that are more easily recognized are the trochozoans, and they include the flatworms, the rotifers. Flatworms would be like tapeworms. Rotifers are very small animals. They're very cool, but they are microscopic. Then you have the mollusk, which are a lot more familiar because we eat them. Mollusk would include octopus, clams, and snails. Then you have the annelids, which is the segmented worms, the earthworms. So all of these lophotrochozoans are bilaterally symmetrical. So the phyla before have either been asymmetrical or had radial symmetry. They have 3 tissue layers. So this is the first time we're seeing 3 germ layers or 3 tissue layers. They are protostomes, so the mouth forms from the first opening. And they have the organ level of organization. Some of them have a true coelom and some do not. This is showing you what a lophophore looks like and what a trochophore larvae looks like. Not a real big deal. And here you see the word trochozoan written correctly. Okay, so it should not have said protozoans. Protozoans are in the kingdom Protista, as you hopefully recall. So for our lophophores, we don't have many common examples, but now we're going to talk about the trochozoans, and we do have a lot of good examples that you'll recognize. So, starting with the phylum Mollusca, the mollusk, they're going to have 3 structures. All of them have these 3 structures. All mollusks have a visceral mass, which contains internal organs. Viscera just refers to internal organs. Then all of them have a mantle that may or may not secrete a shell. And all of them have a foot, which is a muscle adapted for locomotion, attachment, or food capture. So like, for example, in the snail, the foot part of the snail is the part that it moves with. It's the part that would be like, we would say it's belly, but it's really its foot. This is the body plan of a typical mollusk. This one has a shell, and you can see the mantle. The mantle itself is this structure, and this mantle produces the shell, but in some mollusks it does not. You can see the foot in this one. This is going to be what we call a gastropod because the foot is down here underneath the shell. And then the visceral mass is this whole area that has these internal organs. And some of these are primitive, but like there's a primitive heart and blood vessels. There are gonads, gills, and then this is a primitive stomach. So there's a primitive digestive system and even some nerves. So we're starting to see more complexity. So mollusks, again, are protostomes. We also can call them trochozoans, and they contain a visceral mass, a mantle, and a foot. They're the term mollusk means soft-bodied, soft-bodied. So they have a soft body, and some of them have a shell, but not all, because an octopus does not have a shell. They have a heart that pumps a fluid called hemolymph through vessels into a hemocoel. So this is called an open circulatory system. That means that instead of the blood being enclosed within blood vessels and a heart, there's an area where all of that fluid, all of that hemolymph is just like released, and this area is called the hemocoel. All right, so we have the divisions. There are three basic types of mollusks. There are bivalves, which have two shells, clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops. Most all the bivalves that I can think of, we eat them. You know, they have an open circulatory system and they are filter feeders. They do not have a head, and they have very little cephalization or head region. I love scallops. They're my favorite shells to collect on the beach. But what you may not get a chance to see is that all these little blue dots are eyes. So if you ever find a scallop with the animal inside, all those little blue dots are the eyes of the scallop. And here you see mussels, which are freshwater, like freshwater bivalves. So bivalves have two shells. Gastropods have one shell, if they have a shell. So a slug does not have a shell, but what it does have in common with a snail is that it kind of uses its muscular foot for gliding along, moving along the surface. So slugs, snails, whelks, conchs, both of these, it kind of depends on where you are as to which one is which, but they're the really big, pretty shells that you find at the beach. Limpets, which are similar to snails, and nudibranchs. So they're called gastropods because that means stomach-footed. Stomach-footed means they kind of move along on their stomach, but it's really not a stomach, it's a foot. It just looks like a stomach. Here is a picture of the flamingo tongue shell, kind of a type of slug, very exotic looking slug, and then there's a land snail. So these are examples of gastropods, and we'll talk about the cephalopods in the next video.